Legends and Losers, is proudly sponsored by Oracle NetSuite. Go to netsuite.com/legends to turbocharge your growth. On today's episode, we have my dear friend, the incredible John Bielenberg. He's a designer, entrepreneur, educator, and strong advocate for a better world. John is recognized as a leader in the Design for Good movement. And we have a riveting conversation about business, branding, marketing, life, learning, the risks of being different, and why John Bielenberg wants you to think wrong. All right. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, my legendary friends. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Legends and Losers. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. And if you're a longtime listener, thank you so much. Our goal here on Legends and Losers is to try to capture legendary conversations that matter, conversations that are fun, and dialogues that are worth sharing. And man, do we have that today. And we don't just look for the good stuff. We also try to unpack the losery, if you will. And that's the name Legends and Losers. You can't be a legend without being a loser. And today, John and I have a remarkable conversation. Now, before we get to John, is QuickBooks holding you back? Do you have an e-commerce business that's maybe disconnected back office to front office, or maybe not working the way you want it to work? Then it's time to grow up, to NetSuite. Check out netsuite.com/legends. Now, NetSuite is our founding sponsor for a reason. You know, we didn't want to have a right-handed underwater basket weaving company. NetSuite's mission is deeply tied to our mission to help you design a legendary business and a legendary life. Now, if you're in the e-commerce business, NetSuite provides you with an omni-channel, that is multi-channel, all the channels that matter, commerce platform that connects your business to deliver the shopping experiences that you want and all of your back office accounting, inventory, and all of that good stuff. They have a special product for this called NetSuite Suite Commerce that allows you to unify e-commerce with point of sale and all those back office systems, ultimately to excite and delight your customers and to help you get to the whole next level of growth and ultimately dominate your category and become a category queen or king. On top of that, NetSuite allows you to run your business and deal with all this stuff in real time from your smartphone. Now, I need a lot of lessons, I'll tell you that. For Legends and Losers listeners, our friends at NetSuite are offering you a 1-hour consultation on how to turbocharge your growth. Go to netsuite.com/legends, and when you get there, you'll be able to sign up to meet with an expert in your industry to talk about the barriers and the opportunities to growth. So check out netsuite.com/legends as soon as you get a chance. All right. My dear friend, John Bielenberg. I've known John Bielenberg since the late 90s, and he blew me away from the minute I met him. He is one of the few designers that have really taught me everything that I know about branding and design in a business context. And I'm stoked to say I've now had all of my design teachers and heroes on Legends and Losers. Peggy Burke was on episode number 35. She's the founder of 1185 Design. And Karen Hibma and her late husband, Michael Cronin, also have taught me a tremendous amount. And Karen was our guest on episode 144. And so for me, it is a thrill to have had all of them and today to be sharing John with you. Now, if you want all the details on John's background, check out legendsandlosers.com and check out the show notes. You'll be able to find him, connect with him, and read the all of the good stuff. But let me give you the highlights. He's the co-founder of an outfit called Future Partners. He's the author of an incredible book called Think Wrong: How to Conquer the Status Quo and Do Work That Matters. He has won more than 250 design awards and ultimately won the American Institute of Graphic Arts Gold Medal for Lifetime Achievement. He's also the first business designer to ever be featured at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and they acquired over 6 of his design projects and staged a solo exhibition of his work back in 2000. Here he is, the legendary John Bielenberg. So you're in Kansas.
I'm in Lawrence, Kansas.
And what are you doing in Lawrence, Kansas?
I'm the director of the Think Wrong Institute here at the University of Kansas.
When did the Think Wrong Institute end up at the University of Kansas?
About a month ago.
Okay, good. So I was feeling like I was way out of the loop. So I'm only been out of the loop for a short period of time.
Yeah, it's all new.
So tell me all about that.
Now, or you want to wait?
I don't want to wait. Let's go. Joey Ramone said, "Hey ho, let's go." Tell me all about it, John.
Yeah, well, I've been looking for an academic partner for a while for this whole Think Wrong stuff. And I was running a program at CCA in California and San Francisco.
CCA?
Yeah, California College of the Arts.
Of course.
Called Secret Project. That was my first attempt. But I'd been doing stuff with the University of Kansas for a while. I have a lot of friends here on the faculty, and the dean of the School of Architecture and Design and the provost stepped up and said they want this here, across all the disciplines. Wow. So it's not just design, it's engineering, science, law, medical, it's across the whole school. So it's really building this Think Wrong methodology into the university.
And so why do law students need to think wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's more on the entrepreneurial innovation side.
I'd love to know what the updated thinking of Think Wrong is, because I remember the initial thinking about Think Wrong. And actually, I got to tell you, I use it all the time. Whenever I'm faced with some kind of a problem, I just naturally, and you taught me this, gravitate towards, okay, well, what would everybody do here? Okay, what's the opposite of what everybody would do here? And no matter how stupid or fucking mental or whatever the opposite answer is, it's a more interesting place to start, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so,
absolutely.
Is that how you think wrong, or how do you think wrong, John?
Yeah, I think that's the basic premise. And I call it a dog with a hat. So if you and I are walking down the street, right? And we're having a conversation, our brains are designed to filter out everything that is not relevant, right? So there are cars going by, people talking. Our brains are saying, don't pay attention. There's advertising, billboards. But somebody walks by with a dog and the dog has a little hat on it. You'll go, hey, check out the dog with a hat, right? So it's the thing that's different that gets people to pay attention, not the same.
Really? So different, not better. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Bielenberg?
It can be better. It doesn't have to be. It just has to be different. Our brains are designed, they're hardwired to pay attention to things that are unique, are unexpected.
Yes.
And in the corporate world, as you know, most things tend to aggregate towards what's already expected, right? Yes. That's kind of where things go, the status quo, business as usual. Yes. So you have to actually work hard, both as an individual and as an organization, to kind of think wrong about challenges.
And so you use the phrase think wrong in a lot of ways to get people to move away from sort of, if you will, linear, traditional, I don't know what words you might use to describe it, but what you might call predictable thinking about something.
Yeah.
Right? I often say, well, what would most people do here? Oh, well, most people would, you look at any problem or any opportunity for that matter, you say, well, what would most people do, right? And that's why I love the expression. I don't know if you remember my old expression. If we were smart and we were us, what would we do?
Yeah.
Right? Because everybody's an expert on what other people should do. And so I've always tried to use that expression. If we were smart and we were us, what would we do? To jar our brains out of being ourselves and try to get to a third person perspective, right?
Right.
so what I've always loved about thinking wrong is it's a simple thing, right? If you say, okay, well, you got to get to the store when, you got to make a left and a right and then another left and then you're at the store. Okay, well, that's what everybody does. So the opposite of that would be make two rights and see what happens.
Right.
Or two lefts or whatever the fuck I said. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
And by going to that place that is the opposite and therefore, quote unquote, clearly the wrong thing to do, you're like, well, okay, well, what if we modify that a little by 5 degrees or something? Yes?
Right. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
one of the things I find myself saying a lot, John, is one of my big hopes in life is that people embrace the exponential value of what makes them different as opposed to the incremental value of what makes them better.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
And so in a lot of ways, you're trying to teach people to think in a completely nonlinear way. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Our brains hardwire over time, right? So we learn stuff. You learn how to walk, you learn how to talk. Right now I have a thought and a vocalization. I don't have to think about how to talk and form words, and it allows us to exist in the world. We couldn't exist if we had to kind of learn everything on the fly. The problem is when you're trying to come up with unique, innovative solutions, if you follow those same hardwired kind of pathways to the same solutions, you're not going to be innovative. Right? But our brains are compulsive about following pre-existing pathways. You have to, I think there are natural wrong thinkers, and I actually would put you in that category. I think Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Picasso, Einstein, Jane Goodall, Bjork, I think they're just natural. The rest of us actually have to work harder at it. And that's really where thinking wrong comes in. You have to actually push your brain kind of past its comfort zone. And the status quo or business as usual is like gravity. It will want to pull everything onto that kind of linear pathway. Yes. You have to kind of overcome gravity.
It's funny, we have a whole chapter in Play Bigger about exactly that. And we call it the gravitational pull of existing market categories, right? The way it is, we are so entwined in the way that it is, we can't see the way that it could be because it is the way that it is. Right.
Yeah. And that's how I describe thinking wrong, because some people, it's designed to provoke a question, right? Think wrong. Oh, what's that all about? And I say it's going from the way things are to the way things should be. So I'm basically saying the exact same thing.
Yes, we call them Frodos for fun, right? From the way it is to the way we as a company want it to be, right? And the interesting thing, I'd be curious in your academic work, John, if you think about one of the greats, Elon Musk you talked about, right? He's trying to move the world from fossil fuels to alternative fuels with a number of his companies, right? And so why is it so hard for people to think wrong, to use your phrase, to be different as opposed to be incremental? Why is it more of us don't have the natural courage to kind of think wrong?
There's a lot of fear, and maybe this isn't answering the question, but there's a lot of risk around being different. I'm going to look stupid, lose my job, will lose money. All of those things are baked into being different. And there's probably a Darwinian advantage to thinking right, and there's probably natural wrong thinkers are probably part of the system, that you need some people thinking wrong to push things farther, but not everyone thinking wrong, because that would be chaos. So that's why I think it's hard. It's biology. I think our brains conspire against us and culture conspires against us. Because when you get a lot of brains all thinking along the same pathways, that will conspire against kind of new ideas and innovation.
It's interesting you say that. Just before we got on, I just got back from my beach run. So at least a couple times a week, we live close to the beach, and I try to get out there. I'm not a huge runner anymore, but I try to get out there at least a couple times a week and get some sweat on. Anyway, it's a beautiful day here in Santa Cruz today, crisp but gorgeous, and kind of medium tide. So anyway, I'm out running on the beach. I like to run, with no shoes on, and when it's nice out like this, we often see these little birdies. I think they're called sandpipers. The ones that run around and they sort of
right.
And they must be eating little somethings that come up when the ocean kind of spits them up, because they're always kind of at the edge of where the water is. And then when a little wave comes, they all run up the beach, and then the wave goes. You know what I'm talking about? They're pretty little.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And there's a flock of them, a pack of them. Right. And I noticed this. I pay more attention to birds because of our hens. I've become this crazy backyard chicken guy. Anyway, long story longer, I always notice it's like, okay, there are these pack of them and they're all running together. And then every once in a while, you see one by themselves, like away from the pack. And I saw that this morning. And as I'm running, I noticed this one that's far away from the pack. And I'm thinking, okay, when is she or he going to figure it out? And there's this moment where they kind of look, they're doing whatever the fuck they're doing in the sand. They look up and they go, oh, I'm by myself. And they like tear over to be with the crowd. And, you and I as human beings, of course, human beings are pack animals, right? Because if there's a pack of 50 of us over here and one of us over here, well, guess who's going to get eaten by the bear, right?
Yeah.
And so to your point, I wonder on this think wrong, this be different, this why are so many people focused on incremental betterism, if that's even a word, than exponential differentism, if that's even a word? And to your point on biology, I wonder if it's like this, primordial herd thing, that if we're the same, if we're like each other, then we're safer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's not crazy.
No, I think it's all. I think you can kind of relate most human behavior to kind of survival or biological mechanisms. Yeah, absolutely. The irony is that the companies and people that everyone talks about are almost always the ones that are, out there, by themselves. And, look at Vincent van Gogh, who died, penniless. But his paintings are probably the most valuable substance on earth per square inch, right? And if he was painting exactly the same as everyone else at the time, we'd never hear about him.
And it's interesting that you say that, because as Heather and I have worked on our new book, Niche Down, this is a mantra we've come back to, which is, if you think about almost everybody you admire, musicians, artists, entrepreneurs, athletic innovators of one kind, athletic supporters, almost all of them, to your point, are, what I would call a category designer, right? So if you think about who's Bob Marley, well, he's not just a musician. He brought reggae to the world. He might not have been the first reggae musician, who the hell knows, but he's the guy who made reggae happen, so to speak. And so I would think of that as a category designer. He was the first to bring that category of music to the world. And the question I always think about is, okay, so who do we want to be in life? Do we want to be Bob Marley, or do we want to be the 87th reggae band?
Right.
And so how do you think about that, John?
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same. And this is why I think we've always gotten along professionally and personally, because what you're talking about with I would argue that all of those category killers are wrong thinkers, either learned or natural. It's the same thing. And so when I talk to students, I just assume that everybody wants that for themselves, and not everyone does.
Right. Most people don't.
It boggles my mind. Like, okay, here's my watch. There's a second. There's a second. That's your life. Like, don't you want to maximize that? Don't you want to achieve amazing, legendary stuff? And it kills me that when I come across people who really don't, and I can't relate to it.
My favorite, back in the day, I've embraced this expression back in the day. I resisted it for a long time because I think it's meaningless, but I kind of love that it's meaningless. Anyway, back in the day, I used to tell this joke about people who were like that in the Silicon Valley. And I'd put my feet up on the desk and, kind of sit there like this and go, somebody would come up to you in your cube and I'd go, shh, hey, shh, be quiet. I'm vesting. That is to say, I'm vesting my stock options, right?
Yeah.
My job, I'm over here vesting my stock options, trying not to get noticed. And whatever you do, don't wake me up and don't make me do anything that might remotely get me fired because I'm just chilling my nuts over here, vesting my stock options, right?
Yeah.
And I've never understood that either. Why you'd want to be that kind of a person.
I don't know that people do. Maybe fear, prevents them. My biggest fear is like you're on your deathbed and you're looking back at your life and just thinking, is that it? Is that all I did?
All I did was a bunch of incremental shit.
Yeah, or living a regular life,
or as we say here in America,
it's terrifying.
Regular. Notice, John, Americans say regular today. There's certain words, there's certain vowels and consonants. They swallow. And it was like when I was at Mercury, right? The company's called Mercury, and a lot of people would say Mercury. It's just like they'd say. So, what is regular here at Mercury? And so here's the thing, a question I ask. So what you're describing is the place I naturally go.
Yeah.
And there's a big fucking tax for naturally going there, right? I'll give you a simple example. When I was learning to play guitar as a kid, and, first you learn the first few chords, and then you learn bar chords and a few things. But after you sort of get the very basics, then you start learning to play songs, right? And, of course, you learn to play cover songs. And so, Bob Dylan, Knocking on Heaven's Door, 4 chords. There you go. But I couldn't really, in the very beginning, I couldn't learn to play other people's songs because, I couldn't keep time, or I would fuck up the chords, or it was just like when I was a little kid and you say, okay, paint in between, paint by numbers, or color in the lines. It's the paint by numbers was a mess. And so you give me the 4 chords and, G-A-D, G-A-C, G-A-D, G-A-C, G-A-D, G-A-C. That's the whole fucking song. And I would screw that up. But if you left me alone for 20 minutes, I would write a song and I could play you that song and never screw the chords up. And so my point is, it was a lot more work for me to learn Knocking on Heaven's Door than it was to write my own thing.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is, if that's true for me, is the same true for other people, only inverted? Like if you said to somebody, hey, go write your own song after they knew, 5 or 6 chords, do they have the same horrible feeling and problem that I have when you say, okay, you learned 5 chords, play Bob Dylan songs, and I'm like, oh, fuck, I can't stay in between the lines.
Yeah, I'd say 95% of the population is in the other camp. I think you're the aberration. But I would say that is creativity.
And where do you put yourself? Where are you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm more cautious than you are. I think you are comfortable just throwing yourself out there and be as it may. And I like being around people like that. I would say Rich Bonnell, is another one like that. So I'm a little more cautious, but I cannot, really constitutionally unable of following the same path as everybody else. And I got thrown out of college at RIT in Rochester, New York for thinking wrong. Yeah. I was asked to leave because I was doing the assignments, but I was thinking wrong. I was technically doing them, but not the way they wanted them done. And the class, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, I remember I had this aha, and I'm pretty sure you helped me with this aha, because it came back in the science days, right? And we were doing a lot of thinking about this thinking back then in the 90s.
Yeah.
And at least for me, the aha I had was there were people in business who were breakers and creators. They would break the way it is and create a new way, right? And today I call those category designers. It's the same thing, right? And then there are people who are managers and growers.
Right.
And of course, both are critical. Both are important. To your point, on balance, I think the world probably, I don't know, you tell me, probably needs more managers and growers than breakers and creators. And the aha I had in my career was, as a breaker and creator, I was only valuable for about 2 years. Because after 2 years or so of breaking and creating, breaking the old thing and creating the new thing, if it worked, that is to say the new thing takes off, then what you need is for the managers and growers to scale the thing and really have at it. And the worst thing you could have is the asshole, 2 years in, break it again because it's like, hey, we're just getting started. And so it explained to me why I got fired so often. Right? And so is there I guess this leads to a question, John, is there some kind of cycle of like, how do we know when we should be creative and think wrong? And how do we know we should, milk the cow, so to speak?
Yeah. So I think this is a piece of thinking wrong that we haven't really talked about, that part of the process is to generate as many ideas as possible at the beginning. You can then select, well, this is awesome. We're never going to be able to do it for these reasons. Too many resources or money or not enough time or whatever. But if you don't throw that stuff against the wall, you'll never get to it later on. So even in a mature organization, I would argue that you want to constantly think wrong, about everything, about the cafeteria, about HR, about marketing, about product services. You can then select, this is going to be too disruptive in this organization. But I just say you can think wrong about everything, at the beginning, and then kind of filter it down to what's kind of doable or reasonable. Because why wouldn't you? You know what I mean? Like, you think about, there's very little in business life that's surprising. That dog with a hat. Usually you just go to work and it's the same people, the same elevator ride, the same lunch, selections, everything. Like, it's mind numbing, like, why would you want that?
Yeah.
So even if you're just rethinking the meal experience, or, I just argue that you always want to do it. Doesn't mean you execute everything. But I know about the breaking, how much disruption is useful and functional.
Yeah.
Question.
And I'm a little reminded, of course, you remember the musician Jack White from the White Stripes.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I remember years ago, I think it was in Rolling Stone, but I remember reading an interview with him, sort of talking about the breakup of the band. And he sort of said, when he and Meg started, they didn't know how to play instruments. So they just bang, bang, crash, crash. And he said it started to go downhill for him once they started to get good at their instruments.
Yeah.
Because once you know how to play guitar, the problem is you know how to play guitar.
Right.
And so you live in this how to play guitar paradigm, if you will, is like one of my favorite musicians of all time is of course Tom Waits. And one of the things Tom has said he likes to go do is he likes to go to the junkyard. And when he's at the junkyard, he looks for things that he can make musical instruments out of. And he brings pots and pans and whatever the fuck he finds into the studio and sees what kind of noises he can make. And so there's a childlike thing he's trying to do by sort of creating things that make different sounds to spur a different kind of creativity.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's a true original, you know. The question is, does everyone need to be original? And probably not, you know. You do need those people to optimize and manage. I just can't do it.
Yeah. And, you know, I actually think, now, if your superpower is that operational management, that's an incredible superpower. And the people that I know that have that skill are some of the most legendary people I know in business. And so, you know, don't, to quote Archie Bunker, misconstrue what I'm saying. That is a very, one of my favorites, very, very powerful, very important thing to do. But it is interesting to have that combination, right? So here's what I'm trying to say. One of the best, actually the best execution executive I know is a woman named Sue Barsamian. And Sue and I work together at, if you'll allow me, Mercury. And one of the things I loved about Sue was she did and does have a creative part of her brain and a strategic part of her brain, for sure. And she's incredibly self-actualized. She knows she's an operating executive and she focuses on that. But she's smart enough to know when we need those big ideas and kind of how to bring people in to inject that thinking wrong. And I've always admired that. And so even if you're, and the flip side is true, if you're very entrepreneurial, very creative, the best creators, innovators I've ever known also realize that they need to bring in that operational expertise at a certain point. Otherwise, this thing's not going to get past some level, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I guess, how do you think about that? So if you're always got to be thinking wrong, how do you think about getting the balance between operational excellence and thinking wrong that creates and disrupts?
I think at the beginning, there has to be a lot of disruption. You know, at the birth of a company, you've got to have, it's probably 80 disruption, 20 operational. And then at some point it probably flips, or, you know, it kind of gradually changes percentages. So I guess that's how I'd answer that.
Yeah.
But one of the things, we haven't really touched on this, but the reason I think we need this now is because humans' impact on the planet is unsustainable now, right? And so I worked with Al Gore a few years ago on something called the Climate Reality Project, and became very versed in climate change and extreme weather patterns. And we're kind of at the beginning of all of that now. But we also have population growth. We've got species extinction. We've got deforestation. That, you know, and so I think we're hitting kind of an unprecedented number of challenges. And incremental kind of change or innovation is not going to work. It's not fast enough. It's not strong enough, and I think it's unprecedented in human history, and so I feel an increased urgency, you know, to address big problems, you know, using disruptive, creative thinking.
Interesting.
And some of that, you know, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we can't. I think you'd probably agree. We can't rely on politics or religion or, you know, that kind of leadership. I think it's got to be people like Elon Musk. I think you're going to see it in disruptive capitalism, I guess I'd call it, companies versus organizations or governments.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying about that because, well, I don't want to be ignorant of the role historically and the role going forward for government, for universities, for research think tanks, and various organizations like that. Because of course, without the U.S. government, we don't have the internet, right? So there's this thing where people shit on things that aren't entrepreneurial, that things aren't generated from the business world. I'm not one of those people, and I know you're not either. But interestingly enough, if you think about what Elon is doing, particularly with SpaceX, one of the big sort of mind blowers, and there's been two for me about this. One is no private organization, to the best of my knowledge, and certainly no venture-backed startup, has ever achieved the kinds of things SpaceX has achieved. The only kinds of organizations that have ever done anything remotely close to this shit are government in nature. Yes?
Yeah, I do agree. Yeah.
And so in a world where our government and other governments are backing down off of those kind of, maybe you could call them big I innovations, right?
Yeah.
That shit's got to come from somewhere.
Right.
The other thing, and I'd actually be curious to ask you this. Did you know by chance, John, that, and before I make the comment I wanted to make, that researchers tell us we're at an all-time low in American entrepreneurship?
No, I didn't. I wouldn't have guessed that.
I wouldn't have either. MIT and Brookings came out with some research in 2016 that said that, and I've been tracking this topic ever since. More recent stuff from Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine and other places have said, by way of example, that the millennials are currently forecasted to be the least entrepreneurial generation in American history, and are forecasted to be the first generation in American history that are less well off than their parents.
Yeah.
The other one that blows me away is, I forget the exact number. I can dig it out if you like. But the majority of people in our country work for a company less than 50 people in size. And new and small companies have, and I forget the exact number. I quoted it on a recent show, but some meaningful degree more of patents than large companies. And so I look at all that and go, well, the jobs and the innovation are coming from entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial people and working in entrepreneurial small e growth companies. And so I look at the data and it's terrifying to me.
Yeah.
And then I go back to Elon to pull this all together. I actually think that the greatest contribution he's making is he's showing all of us what's possible. He's an icon of possibility. Right. And there's something very cynical about a lot of what I hear in our world today. About people, about the way we treat each other. There's a lot of cynicism today, I think. And so for me, entrepreneurs like Elon, and really even the entrepreneur that opens the local corner market with an innovative idea to kind of dominate, six blocks of the neighborhood.
Right.
Those are the people who are, if you will, slaying the cynicism of our times with their dreams. That to me is what entrepreneurs do. And so I think he's giving us a real gift by reminding us what one person who puts a small group of people together can actually do. It's an incredible inspiration.
Yeah. I think optimism is undervalued. It just, that cynicism, it's easy to be cynical, and to just trash ideas and people. I had lunch with Kimball Musk, Elon's brother, a few years ago in Boulder. And I asked him about Elon, and this is before, this big SpaceX and all that. He was doing Tesla. And I said, what drives him? And he said, well, Elon is really smart, but he has the ability to pick the hardest things to crack, right? Space travel, electric vehicles in the age of SUVs. And then he puts all the chips on red or black, right? So he took his PayPal fortune and just shoved it onto Tesla when everybody thought it was a complete failure. And most of us have a governor that at some point says, I'm going to keep 10 million over here.
Hey, don't go mental, eh?
Yeah. And I think that's huge. I give him so much credit. And, recently shot up the Tesla, sports car, which I think is awesome.
Of course it's awesome. Anybody that doesn't like that can go fuck themselves, right?
It's the dog with a hat. So if he put up some kind of testing satellite, nobody gives a shit, right? But he does a car with the guy in it and the Starman. It's epic. But the other side of this is that it's easy. I've seen a lot of people trash that. Like, what a waste of money. We need this money for other things. Fuck it. No, it's his car. He can do whatever he wants. So part of this, Chris, is what I call rhino hide. To put yourself out there, you have to not only have tough skin, you have to have rhino hide, because people they just love to take you down and throw rocks if you put yourself out there like that. And for some reason, Elon, I've never met him. I don't know him, but he's got that. He might be vulnerable in some ways, but in other ways, that whole flamethrower thing with the Boring Company, that was insane.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Right.
I use that as an example of the thinking wrong, that I don't even know if it was a good idea or not, but he did it, got a lot of flack, and then he did the fire extinguisher version.
I love, there was that expression years ago, stick-to-itiveness, that came about, which I think is a fun thing. But I would also call what he's doing, he has incredible don't give a fuckitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And look, it's hard. Like, I had this moment, and not of course nowhere in the same league, but in my own little world, trying to do things that are different, that make it different. So, like, not being different just but being different because you actually see a missing and you want to fill that missing. So you see something that's missing that others don't maybe see, and it drives you crazy to go fill that missing. And the thing in my life that has been Legends and Losers, as well as Play Bigger, and now my new book with Heather, Niche Down, is I see these things and I don't understand why other people don't see them. And then you get to this place where you just have to fill the missing, because if you don't, it's going to make you crazy. Said a different way, Legends and Losers is the podcast I wanted to listen to. And I got to a place where, in my opinion, the lack of authentic dialogue in business there was so much missing of authentic dialogue, if I could say it that way. I just fucking had to do it myself, because you become obsessed, right? And you go for it. And when you put it in the world, it is scary, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
that's a fucking podcast, not a spaceship. So I'm in no way confused about like the levels of this that we're talking about, right? But it even for someone like me who had success before and really is just doing this as a hobby, to your point on rhino skin, it does take a lot of rhino skin to say, you know what? I actually think the vast majority of podcasts fucking suck. I think most people have gotten it fucking wrong. And I think enough's enough with the prefabricated fucking talking points and bullshit interviews. Is it, if you believe what I believe that real authentic conversations can change your life and can change the world. As a matter of fact, they're the only thing that ever has. And so why wouldn't you try to create a podcast that is at least attempting to capture that kind of conversation, that kind of lightning in a bottle, conversations that matter, right? Is it possible? That's the fucking question. At least it was for me, right? And so I understand, what it's like to have that level of feeling exposed. I can only imagine what it's like at his level. And so this all leads to a question. You have been teaching people how to do this for what? I mean, hey, Bielenberg, I hate to tell you, you and I have known each other for at least 20 years, brother.
Yeah, 98 probably.
98, right?
Yeah.
That's right. And so, look, I've known you for 20 years. You've been on this think wrong mission for 20 years in one way or another.
Yeah.
So what have you learned in trying to teach people to have the courage of their convictions, to be different and to think wrong and to use their creativity and to be creative and disruptive and all the good shit? What are the big learning about how to do that?
So back in the Scient days, 98, 99, it was the beginnings of this kind of stuff. And, Scient, I think we did some legendary work together there where we were really thinking wrong about marketing. They all quit, all of that. So that was like the beginning where I was trying to push this into my own work, as a designer and brand strategy guy. Then I started in 2003, I started this program called Project M, where I would take a group of young students, at that transition from college to getting a job. We'd go to a distressed place like Detroit or East Baltimore, or rural Alabama, Reykjavik, Iceland after their collapse, New Orleans after Katrina. And we integrate into the community, figure out something positive to do, think wrong about how to do it, and get it done in a short period of time. So that was my first kind of sort of prototype of how do you I think of it like herpes. How do you infect people with this think wrong herpes that will eventually come out some other time in their career?
I think we need to rethink that. It's like, thinking wrong is kind of like herpes. I don't know about you, but herpes is high on the list of things I don't want, John.
It doesn't work so.
Anything nasty that grows on your genitalia, kind of not my thing.
It doesn't work so well with parents. But anyway, that's why I was trying to
be viral.
Give these people this experience, this very immersive, intense experience, and then they would understand the value of thinking wrong. I did that about 10 years and then started looking for the bigger academic partner, which is kind of what I'm starting here. The thing I've learned, and I'll give a couple quick stories, is that it's not for everyone, both on the individual level, and we talked about that a little bit, but also on the company, large organization level. We were brought into JP Morgan at one point to help them kind of energize their innovation kind of program. They had funded like $100 million for innovation, and what we found was it was physically impossible. Like there was no way, JP Morgan was, their idea of innovation was out-regulating anybody else, who was trying to disrupt banking. And so that's one thing I've learned. There some people in organization, it's just never going to work. And that's super frustrating for me. But there are a whole bunch of young people that have been influenced, have gone off and done crazy cool stuff, and that's very satisfying.
The interesting thing about that, so my friend Ray Wong from Constellation Research, he's been called the most important tech analyst in the world. And he wrote this book called Disrupting Digital Business. And one of the things he looked at was what's happened to the Fortune 500 since the turn of the century. And half of them are not on the list. Bankrupt, acquired, or just turned shitty, fell off the list.
Yeah.
And the thing so that's kind of point A. Point B, an old buddy of mine, do you remember Nick DiGiacomo back in the Science days?
Yeah.
Yeah, so God rest his soul. Nick said to me once, he said he was older than me and wise, and we were bitching the shit out of big dumb companies. Remember that expression we used to use and stuff. And when we realized they were a third of our revenue, we kind of backed off. Bob Howe came to me, our CEO, and said, "Listen, lochhead, those big dumb companies pay a lot of the bills around here, man." But anyway, I can remember DiGiacomo saying to me, "Christopher, the reason big companies are conservative is because they have something to conserve."
Yeah.
But the irony is, when you achieve that level of success, and the vast majority of your executive team are managers and growers and harvesters, and by definition, you therefore are conservative, like half of you are going to get fucked. And so there's this really fascinating thing, which is the human pre-wired condition of I'm going to play safe. I'm not going to think wrong. I'm going to milk the cow. I'm going to to use your phrase, which I love, I'm going to keep doing business as usual, and maybe I'm going to do some incremental things, add some new features or whatever. Well, that's a good and smart thing to do for some period of time. If that's the main thing you do, the evidence is very, very clear. And so I guess my point is, being conservative is actually the least conservative thing you can do. Is it not?
Maybe I say it a little different. I always say the risk is to not risk. And maybe that's the same thing.
Yeah, no, there's a great JFK quote about, right? What does he say? Let me see if I can remember this right. I think he says there are costs and risks to a program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risks and costs of comfortable inaction.
Yeah, exactly.
And you spent 20 years trying to teach people to get outside of that comfortable inaction, that incrementalism.
Yeah. And there's a process to it. So over that time, developed like these 6 different, we call them practices, that help kind of push past like the barriers that get in the way.
What are those 6?
Well, the first is be bold. And that's, start with a big, bold challenge, right? Because things will conspire to bring it down.
Yeah.
So you might, Jobs, I think, inaccurately is quoted as saying the dent you want to make in the universe. I'm not sure he actually said that, but I like it. So start with that, and I think Elon is probably the best example of that right now. The next one is get out. And this is about getting out of your comfort zone. So when you're traveling, it's all new. You don't have any pre-existing pathways. So, go places you've never been before, talk to people you don't know, because it opens up possibility. The next one is let go. And this has to do with giving yourself permission to let go of all your orthodoxies and pre-existing ideas. The next one is make stuff, which a lot of times, Chris, you've been in these meetings, I've got this idea, and then it'll just go around and around, and the contrarians and devil's advocates, we could never do that. We tried that. It's not going to work, whatever. Nothing happens, right? So make stuff is, there's a point where you have to stop talking and just do something, start making something, and that'll inform the process. The next one is bet small. And this is really based on a book by a buddy, Peter Sims, called Little Bets, which is, just try something, an affordable loss. I don't know if this is going to work. Let's just try it and see what happens. And the best thing about this, it alleviates some of that risk. When you say, let's just try it, it's probably not going to work. We'll see what happens. It's easier to kind of push something along. And the last one is move fast.
Sorry to interrupt you on that one.
Yep.
Because that's really counter to a lot of the self-help, goal setting, mumbo jumbo, right? Where you dream big. Fucking A, I wrote a book called Play Bigger, right? That go for it, go bigger, go home. And so bet small, that's an interesting, like what do we have to lose? Well, if we risk $500,000, who gives a shit, right? We've done stupider things with $500,000.
Yeah. And it scales. It's like if you're a small nonprofit, it might be $100 and a week, or if you're Microsoft, it might be 5 million. So you scale it, but just try a bunch of shit and see what works. And then the last is move fast. And how do you capture the momentum off some of those small bets and then move fast?
So let me make sure I got them right. 1, be bold.
Yep.
2, you said get out.
Yep, get out.
3, let go, surrender. Just
4, let go of your orthodoxies.
Fuck the whole thing. Just let it go. 4, make stuff. Just go start playing with whatever it is. Once you figure out whatever it is, 5, bet small. Interrupt me.
Right. Oh, I was just going to say the make stuff is stop talking, start making. You can go around and around and debate shit forever and nothing ever happens.
It is interesting when you just take some action, right? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I don't know about you. I always feel better after taking some action. Even if the action fails, we took some action, like we did something.
Right. And I would argue there's more learning that happens in those failures, those affordable losses than there is in successes.
Say more about that if you could.
That when you do something and it doesn't work, it shows you exactly what didn't work. When you're successful right out of the gate, I think it's harder to know why than it is when you don't succeed. You kind of know why.
Yes.
We call it LFI, learning from investment, instead of ROI.
That's such a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Around here, we have a term for it. We invented a word, Colin and I. We call it losery.
I like that.
Yeah, we really, this is the house of losery. And it's funny because when you pre-build into your mindset losery, and the reason we named it losery and not losing, or we wanted, you've been to Australia, of course.
Yeah.
And the Aussies have cute nicknames for everything. Normally they'd have they call board shorts, surfboard shorts, they call them boardies, and they call sunglasses sunnies and shit, right? So losery is sort of like an Australian way of making loser sound better, right? Like it's cute. Oh, we're gonna have some losery along the way, and we'll put on our boardies and our sunnies, and we'll do some losery.
I like that.
But what I love about what you're saying in here is that you're pre-building the losery into the mindset. It's like, well, of course that's going to happen.
Right.
And like, we're always surprised when shit doesn't work, when we try new stuff, right?
Yeah.
So for example, the newest physical thing I've been doing lately for the last, 2 or 3 months, I've been doing Pilates, or I use Pilates. I don't know. Do you know how to say it?
I think that's right.
Pilates.
Yeah.
I think if you're in the Hamptons, it's Pilates. I think Pilates classes are probably more expensive than Pilates classes. But like, have you ever done Pilates or Pilates there, John?
No.
So you go in.
I know what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, go in and at least in my case, I don't know. It seems like this is more popular with women than men, but I don't have any data to prove that. It just seems that way around here anyway. So you go in, and there's this studio full of ladies, and they've got these machines, I guess, in them. I don't know what they call them. They look somewhat primordial to me, right? You know what I'm talking about. And you kind of sit on and do all that stuff. Anyway, it's very intimidating, I think, at least for me as a guy. Like I walk in there and, I'm a reasonable weekend warrior athlete. I'm no John Bielenberg, but, and you go in there and they make you do this stuff, right? And it's amazing. They're like isolating like the bottom quarter of your psoas or something with this very small movement. Like it's all very small movements. And like your whole body can shake and you're doing this tiny thing. You're like, how can this be? And you just feel like terrible. Like everything I do in there, I suck. Everything. And so, but yet I walk out and I'm like, wow, it's like she gave me new hips. Like I have new hips and I feel great. And so anyway, long story longer, there's real value in doing important stuff that you suck at.
Yeah.
And in my case, like an entire hour of nonstop losery.
Yeah, I like that.
It's good for the body and the soul, right? And then in the end, you're like, oh, God, I spent that hour sucking and I feel great.
Yeah.
And then 3 months later, you suck a little less. You're like, oh. And then she gives you new stuff to suck at, which is like, oh, we had that shit down. There's all this other new stuff for losery, right? The domains of losery exploration never stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
And so how do you teach these students to embrace, that kind of approach?
I take them through that process. So I'm doing it right now. We have a class called Cyclo Lab here at the university where it's architecture, industrial design students, and it's all built around cycling. And we come at it from all kinds of stuff. Building bamboo bikes is one. We're doing like cargo bikes right now. But at the beginning of the class, we went and there's a warehouse in Kansas City full of confiscated bikes. And they said we could go in and grab, we call them cadaver bikes, right? So they have kiddie bikes, BMX, road bikes, mountain bikes. So we just loaded up this trailer with about 30 bikes, brought them back to we have this warehouse, and the students just had to hack them apart. And I told them to make the wackiest, stupidest bikes possible. Like little tiny front wheels and big handlebars and totally non-functional things. And so I'm just trying to push them past where they would normally kind of stop, right? So they're trying to get a good grade. They're trying to satisfy the instructors, and I'm just right out of the gate, just trying to just go for it, be stupid. The stupidest bike wins, and I think if you start out with that, it's much easier. The other thing I talk about is if you start with an idea that's interesting, funny, legendary, different, you can always pull it back a little bit. It never goes the opposite way. It never goes from, we're doing something like really responsible, we know it's going to return on investment. It'll never be funny, interesting. It never goes the opposite. So start up there and then kind of taper down if you have to. So I just try to load all this stuff on the students and give them kind of a legendary experience. This is a nod to you, Chris. The other thing I say at the beginning is, I don't care what you do, right? That's up to you. You need to think wrong about it, do something amazing. But the only thing, you got to do something, and it has to be legendary. And I learned that from you. Like, that's all I care about, right? The other thing I remember, Chris, is that, no results plus excuse doesn't equal results, which I've always loved. I use that all the time as well. You know,
That
because it's so easy.
I got that from my friend and mentor Bix Bixon, who's been with us several times now on Legends and Losers. But yeah, and so I'm curious on both fronts. But let's go to the legendary front. When you say that to your students, what's their initial reaction?
They laugh because it's not what they're used to hearing. And then I think it's intimidating. And I think that's okay. You know, I think it's okay to have that bar at the legendary height. Because it'll come down, you know, but it's almost like your job is to hold that bar as high as possible. Because everything, you know, you got to just kind of push it back up.
And the thing that has always struck me about this is if you don't say what you just said about do something, whatever you do, make it legendary. If you don't say that, so the unspoken always speaks louder than the spoken, or often, maybe not always, often speaks louder than the unspoken. And so the way I think about it, John, is, okay, so let me understand this. This new company we're creating, or new product we're creating, or new thing, whatever it is we're doing, this thing that we're doing, this marketing campaign, whatever the thing is that we're doing. So what you're saying to me is we are going to contextually agree at the front end to do something not legendary?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
And I always thought, well, why would we say that? Like, if we're gonna fucking do it, wouldn't we want to be legendary at it?
Yeah, yeah. And I've got this buddy, Andy Dreyfus, and he was creative director at Apple for years. He knew Steve Jobs really well, and then now he's at Pixar. He's creative director there.
Oh wow!
And we had lunch. He'd be a good person to have on the show. We had lunch right after Steve Jobs died, and I go, you know, Andy, how does this impact Apple? And he goes, oh, it's over. I was like, really? He goes, it'll take a while, but it's a slippery slope because Steve Jobs, you know, he was the guy that wanted legendary, and he did not, because he was kind of a sociopath, he did not care about the board, the shareholders, consumers, marketing. You know, it had to be legendary. And Andy said that when you were a designer at Apple, you could always threaten to call Steve. So if marketing was trying to push a product out by a certain deadline, but it just wasn't quite right, you could just go, you know, I'm going to call Steve. And Steve would always back up the designers. Always. He didn't give a shit about the other stuff. And when you take that away, like, that's hard. That's really, really hard. And you take it away and it'll just be this, you know, gradual slope that you slide down. And he said you can't learn anything from Steve. He was one of a kind. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be like Steve Jobs. You know, he was, you know, impossible, but legendary for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way I have tried to deal with that in the past, I realized early on that if I was screaming legendary at the employee, the experience they had was one of an asshole yelling at them. Even if I was right, or even if they thought I was smart or creative or whatever, I was still an asshole. And you know, I don't know if you heard this episode. We had Kim Scott on, the author of Radical Candor.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, she's unbelievable. Great, really important book. But probably the most powerful thing she said, or certainly one of them, is the effectiveness of radical candor gets measured not in your mouth, but in their ears. Right? And so the change I made somewhere along the line, I think it was probably back in the Scient days, as I was sort of learning to be an executive, was rather than scream legendary at people, inspire them to do legendary work. right? So with designers, by way of example, I've always ever since then learned to say, hey, listen, you know the legendary work that you love to do? You know the work that no other client has the fucking balls to go execute? You know those big ideas that get watered down and turned into shit because the client you're working for is like a legendary destruction manufacturing facility? That shit, do that work for me. Because if you do, it's going to see the light of day. Do you remember the first thing I said to you when you...
Oh, yeah. I was just going to mention that.
Okay,
yeah.
So tell the story from your perspective. I want to hear the story 20 years later from you because I remember my version of it well.
Yeah, as I recall, so Rich Bonnell and I were working on this piece for Scient. I think it was the first thing that
it was the first brochure, and I think it was the first thing you guys ever did for us, right?
Yeah, and it was launching the company, and initially we were working with Greenberg, and you had just come in, and we had this prototype, and we sat down first meeting ever, and looked through it, and you're kind of quiet. And maybe you said, oh, I like this. And then at the end, you say, okay, guys, do me a favor. And we're like, yeah, we still didn't know you. And he said, yeah, sure. He goes, don't let me fuck this up. And that's the first time, that was legendary. That's the first time I'd ever heard that.
Well, and the reason I asked that was, to the point of everything we've been talking about, I knew that the companies destroy legendary, right? Like
yeah.
One of our heroes, of course, is David Ogilvy, right? And he has all these great quotes about committees and why committees are for wankers, right? And you can always tell whether it's product design or marketing or anything that's been done by consensus, right? Yeah. I think consensus is an evil word in business, right? And so I always remember that discussion. Ask people to do legendary, and then the second thing is, and did I ever tell you this story about? And I probably shouldn't say who the ad agency is, but the ad agency at HP who's going to run these ads for us after they acquired us at Mercury.
I don't think so.
So you can imagine the scenario, right? HP at the time is the largest technology company on planet Earth. The Mercury acquisition is the largest software acquisition they've ever done. It was the biggest thing they'd done since they bought Compaq. I mean, it was a big fucking deal, right? $5 billion, So the head of enterprise marketing at HP, Deb Nelson, spectacular executive. She has one of the top agencies in the country as their agency. And if I said who it was, you'd absolutely know who they are. And so Deb comes to me and says, hey, look, we're going to ask, Frederick and Dingledorf to go do this advertising for us. And I'd love for you to participate. Great. So we have this meeting and Frederick and Dingledorf are going to present this. And of course, because it's HP, there's like 1,000 people in the meeting and there's a bunch of old Mercury folks. And so I'm sitting next to Deb and there's all these people and there's Dingledorf people in the room and on the phone and da-da-da-da-da. Everybody introduces himself. That takes 4 hours. You know the meeting. You've been to this meeting. And then the head Dingledorf guy is going to present the creative, and we're going to run a series of full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and so forth, kind of promoting this acquisition of Mercury by HP. So he's about to start, and Deb Nelson, the head of marketing, turns to me and says, before we begin, Christopher, is there anything that you would like to say? And I said, yeah, I just have one question for Jimmy, the head of Dingledorf. Hey, Jimmy, do you think what you're about to show us is legendary work? And he says, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, you guys are, Frederick and Dingledorf, one of the top agencies in the country. This is the biggest thing that HP's done in years, and they're the biggest fucking thing in our industry. And so, I don't know. I just think if we're going to do any marketing, especially with full-page fuck ads, we would do legendary work. He looks at me and he looks at Deb and he looks at his team and he says, can we have 48 hours? And so that question, do you think this is legendary work?
Yeah. Yeah.
It just lets you know where their bar is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you just go back to, okay, so you wouldn't do legendary work in this situation then? And so that's how I learned to go from being the asshole who's sort of setting the bar to let them be their own asshole.
Yeah. I'm going to use that. That's really good. I really like that. Yeah. I think, I can imagine being them, right? You're going into HP, which has a brand, and they don't do legendary advertising at HP. So you come in with this expectation, we're going to do responsible work, that the client will approve. That's as good as we're going to get. So I get it. I know how that.
Well, yeah, and what happens with that responsible work is, I don't know what the cost is today, but a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal is, it's probably coming down, but at the time it was easy. The number I have in my mind is $100,000. It might,
absolutely.
It was in that range, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it was 80 on one day and 125, whatever it was, but it was in that range, right? Yeah. We were going to run a bunch of them. It was in the same price range for the New York Times. I forget how much money they were going to spend, but they were going to spend a giant amount of money. And I just look at that and go, well, okay, so we're going to spend a giant amount of money and we're going to run an ad that is essentially the equivalent of the way parents talk in the Peanuts cartoon, right? Wah, 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 wah. It's completely forgettable.
Yeah.
I look at, listen, I hate to throw them under the bus, but I look at the advertising that HP does today. Oh, fuck. Yeah. It's a whole bunch of wah, 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 wah.
Yeah. I can't even picture it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We did this exercise with Deutsche Bank where we're brought in to help their ad agency, which I think was McCann Erickson, be more creative. And we did this exercise where we took these big bank ads, real ads out of the Wall Street Journals, cut them out, swapped the logos around. So Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, just swap. Nobody could tell. Nobody could tell.
They couldn't even tell their own shit, right?
No. So I said, listen, this is doing nothing, like zero. You might as well just do a giant logo, a big Deutsche Bank logo. You'd get more value out of that, you know, and they all laughed. The other thing we did, we had every creative person from every agency, McCann agency, all over the world. We got them in a room in Frankfurt, Germany. And we had them list all the ways they advertise, like table tents, broadcast, print, blah, blah, blah. And there was a huge list. And then we said, throw it in the trash. You can't do any of that. What do you do? And it was, at first, I think it's hard. And then it's really fun because you've given them permission to think wrong. You can't do that shit. Put it away.
Yes.
But it takes somebody, usually a person, to be disruptive and set that bar. The trick is to not. I think you're right. You can do it and be an asshole. How do you do it and not be an asshole is probably more effective.
Over time, I have learned to manage my assholeness. But I will say one thing. I think it helps to have some asshole in you to get this kind of work done.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important to have a little asshole in you for this kind of work?
I think to not care so much about the way others perceive you. If you really care, you basically want to conform to the expectations, right? This is what people expect. I'm going to try to make them feel good. I'm not going to be disruptive. I think that's it. So if you don't care so much, and I think there's kind of a range of that. Some people don't care at all. I'd put Steve Jobs in that category. I think you have to have some of that.
So the don't.
How do you answer it?
So I think that's part of it. But I'm going to say something really maybe crazy, John. I think people have to be a little bit afraid of you. I've never purposely done anything to kind of cultivate, a scary vibe or however you want to think about it. But I'm reminded of the movie Bull Durham, one of the great classic movies. And do you remember the movie at all, John?
Yeah.
So there's the young, hot pitcher, and then there's the old catcher, right? And the old catcher in the minor leagues job, played by Costner, he's cultivating the young, hot pitcher, played by the guy who was married to Susan Sarandon for all those years.
Robbins, isn't it?
Rob, what's his first name? Yeah, okay, whoever that guy is. And he's got an incredible fastball, right? But he's very undisciplined and so forth and so on. And anyway, there's this scene in the movie where Costner is trying to make sure that he early in the game gets the respect of their opponents. And so, and everybody knows this kid throws, heat, 100-mile-an-hour fastball. So I don't know if it was the first pitcher or the first guy at batter, but it was fairly early in the game. He walks out to the mound and he says to the young hot pitcher, he says, "I'm going to call a pitch, and what I want you to do is hit the mascot." Because the mascot's kind of like hanging around in the on-deck circle, like way away from where the home base is. So he winds up and he throws this pitch and he fucking hits the mascot, and the mascot goes down, and the guy in the batter's box goes, and then Kevin Costner looks at the batter and says, "I never know what this maniac's going to do." And so, being somebody who could beat the shit out of you, being somebody who is known as someone who will make their own rules, so to speak, who is known as someone who is not afraid of being challenged, or however you want to think about it in a business context, there's an air of that, like, hey, every once in a while, this fucker hits the mascot, or I think there's some value to that. It's like it puts a little extra spring in their step.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm a huge, as you know, I'm a huge fight fan, and you'll hear commentators, particularly in the beginning of a fight, somewhere in the first round, and they'll say, well, Johnson has not really gotten Davis's respect yet. And what they mean is that, he hasn't hitting him. That's not a word. He hasn't hit him hard enough to really, to be in the fight yet.
Right. Yeah. Are you getting a signal there?
Yeah, no, we're fine. Why, are you having a technical problem?
No.
I'm having somebody off camera is waving at me, if that's what you mean.
Oh, okay.
Yes. A friend of mine who's here for a visit snuck up into the studio and is waving goodbye. So yeah, that was a distraction there. Right. It wasn't. It wasn't you. And so, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I just wanted to tell you about this new company I'm starting. I'm trying to get back into the design business. So for the last 5-6 years, I've been with future partners helping organizations use thinking wrong to address big challenges. And it's good in some ways, but I miss the creative. I miss making stuff. And so I've got a new, you'll like the name of this new company. It's called Idiota, which is Latin for idiot. Idiota. And originally we were going to call it the idiots. The idiots are here. The idiots are on the phone.
Yeah, we called in the idiots.
Exactly, which I kind of like. It's totally a dog with a hat thing. But the premise is, we're all idiots. Like, we all, we're victims of our orthodoxies, and just, it's better to start kind of a project with the premise that we're all idiots, and to be fearless about exploring new options.
The other thing, and I don't know if you meant this or not with this name, but that I love about that is you can't have a company called, how do you pronounce it? Idiota?
Yeah.
You can't have a company that's called that unless you're over yourself.
Right. It's self-deprecating. Absolutely.
Yeah. And look, I take some things seriously, but I'll tell you this, and here's how much I'm committed to it. If you're not over yourself, go fuck yourself. And I don't care who you are. And we've had some very big time people try to get on this show who are absolute egomaniacs and have no fucking humility whatsoever and still think they're like a very big deal and want to tell you about, I don't know, their art collection or their watch collection or whatever the fuck it is, right? And look, hey, if you have a watch collection and an art collection and that's really your passion and all that, I want to hear about it all day long. But if you're telling me because you're a rich douchebag and you're like, all that, you're doing the dick measuring contest and all that, I just have no. My friend Jeff Denham, the founder of Atira Systems, he's been on Legends of Losers. He's a Patagonia sponsored surfer. He's an incredible athlete. He skis and surfs with the greatest athletes in the world. And he said something to the effect of, if an athlete's talent isn't surpassed by their humility, then I don't want to spend any time with them.
Nice.
Yeah. And so I love that name.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, I love it. And so you're going to go back to doing more classic Bielenberg design stuff?
Yeah, just you doing projects that actually are involved in execution.
Yeah.
And not just kind of idea generation or strategy.
Well, it has been a little weird for the last 20 years to think that one of the greatest designers in the history of the corporate world really doesn't do much design.
Yeah, I know. It's fun. I miss that part. It's fun to have a product at the end of it.
Oh, hey, I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah. Hey, it's Tim Robbins.
It's Tim Robbins. Thank you. Yeah, great actor.
Yeah, it was bugging me. Yeah.
Great actor, great movie. One of my all-time favorites, Tim Robbins. So John Bielenberg is teaching Thinking Wrong at which remind me, I should have written, which university?
University of Kansas, KU.
Kansas. I love that you're in
Jayhawks.
I love that you're in Kansas, that you're not like in New York or LA or of course San Francisco, right? I love that.
Lawrence is actually a really nice college town. But I still have a house in Maine, and my girlfriend's in Bozeman, Montana. And I'm still doing stuff in California, so I'm all over the place.
Do you still have a house in California?
No, we sold our building in Half Moon Bay.
You did, yeah. I remember you told me a while ago you were thinking about doing that. So
yeah, I don't own real estate in California anymore.
Yeah, well, it's going to fall into the ocean any minute now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Bielenberg, anything else you want to touch on before we kick out of this one?
I think we covered it. That was great. That was fun.
John Bielenberg, I love you.
Yeah, Chris, I think this is perfect for you. The podcast is a great platform for Chris Lochhead.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. My grandmother years ago said with her Scottish accent that I had kissed the Blarney Stone.
Yeah.
But I am having a good time. And to your point on, do you like? I didn't know if anybody would be willing to have these kinds of conversations. Never mind, listen to them. And so the fact that like the show's turned out to be a hit is on one hand, I had a sixth sense it might, but on the other hand, I knew full well it probably wouldn't.
Yeah. I just think you have a good style. You're very conversational and you pull stuff out, and it's a talent.
Well, thank you. I just think of it as, wanting to sit down and have a beer with somebody awesome and hopefully something good comes out of it. So,
Great.
well, John, listen, I love you. I love this work that you're doing. I always have. And here's the big thing I want to say to you, buddy. You have taught me so much. You taught me, don't put drapes on the Mona Lisa. Right? The design, it needs to be on purpose for what the purpose is, period. We're not doing art. Right? You just taught me so much, and to stand for the things that you believe in. And so you were kind enough to tell me, some of the things that have sort of stuck with you from our work together. I want you to know, there isn't a day that goes by where I don't think no drapes on the Mona Lisa. I mean, I must quote you on that one. Any kind of design oriented, even like building a house, like any kind of creative execution. Some of those pillars from you are always in my head. And you were the first designer I ever met who believed that the purpose of the design was to serve the purpose of the design.
Yeah.
And I remember you said to me, if the design doesn't, you tell me if I'm remembering this right, multiply the value of the words, then there's just words. Right? You were so opposite to like everybody who are like, no, let's like put a flower there or whatever.
Right.
And so I just want you to know that I carry you with me all the time, and you created a lens for me that I use all the time, and I am and forever will be indebted to you for that.
Thanks. That's nice.
Thank you, brother.
All right. Yeah. Hope to see you soon.
Be legendary, my friend.
Okay. Thanks. You too.
Wow. I'm so glad to have had that time with John. And if you love this episode as much as I do, why not share it on social media right now? If you know somebody in marketing, branding, design, naming, category design, or just in life who you think might love this episode with John as much as I do, why not email it to them as well? And I really want you to know, it's been clear to us that more and more of you are sharing Legends and Losers on social media, and that makes a huge difference. If you also want to make a difference to us, we would love it if you wrote us a review on iTunes or anywhere else where you experience podcasts. All right. We would like to thank Thinking Wrong, How to Conquer the Status Quo and Do Work That Matters, the great book by John Bielenberg. Speaking of great books, HarperCollins Instant Classic Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. This is my first book, new book, Niche Down, coming out soon. Our good friends at Equity Directory, the invite-only network of entrepreneurs and startup talent exchanging work for equity. Check them out at equitydirectory.com. Our good friends, onelifefullylive.org. This is the nonprofit helping you dream, plan, and live your best life. Interview Valet. If you're a thought leader and you want to get your leading thoughts on some podcasts, they are the leaders in podcast interview marketing. This is the smart way to market yourself today. Get yourself on podcasts at interviewvalet.com. Now, if you love Santa Cruz as much as I love Santa Cruz and you're thinking about moving here or maybe picking up a vacation home, my dear friend Mike Block and the Mike Block Real Estate Team. You can find them at Mike, MikeBloch.com. He'll take good care of you. And speaking of realtors that I love, Matthew Hansen runs Tahoe Truckee Homes. He's one of the top realtors in all of Tahoe. If you want to move there or have a vacation home in the beautiful mountains of Tahoe, check out TahoeTruckeeHomes.com. A podcast I love from the nicest man in podcasting, Jamie J. Check out Stop Riding the Pine. The official coffee of Legends and Losers, Verve Coffee. Put some authentic West Coast artisan coffee in your cup at vervecoffee.com. Another book I absolutely love, Hal Elrod's amazing bestseller, The Miracle Morning. If you haven't read The Miracle Morning, I know this sounds outrageous, but it will change your life. Please check it out. the official socks provider to Legends and Losers, our dear friends at johnscrazysocks.com. And speaking of good people, kiva.org, the nonprofit using microfinance loans to change lives all around the world. Check out kiva.org. Now, I must remind you that today's information is provided to you solely for informational purposes, and this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love you just a little bit extra if you shared the shit out of it on social media. Now, I must warn you, Legends and Losers may contain forward-looking statements, backward-looking statements, and completely asinine statements. So remember, future results could differ materially. Remember to teach thinking wrong, be nice to your mother, go ahead, it's okay, pee in your wetsuit, only buy pasture-raised, free-range eggs, introduce 2 people you love to 2 podcasts you love, and if you have a sec, show them how to subscribe, get it set up. It's for new people getting into podcasts, it can be a little bit difficult. So take a second and do that, and you'll make a big difference. Thank you, Dandy Candy. I love you, Mom and Dad. Hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? And today, our deepest apologies go out to Marcus Rust, co-owner and CEO of Rose Acre Farms. Sorry, Marcus, we just ran out of time for you. That's it. I want you to know we really appreciate you investing your lives with us here, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on Legends and Losers.